Welcome to Bold Thinking, entrepreneurial stories honestly told. In a world full of chaos, this is a podcast about the people making positive change in the world, using bold thinking to transform business and themselves. My guest today describes herself as having social butterfly energy, and having spent a bit of time getting to know her, I couldn't agree more. She's absolutely infectious. Raised in Trinidad, Nikkia Reveillac has spent the majority of her career leading on consumer and marketing insights with Colgate-Palmolive in North and South America, Africa and Europe. After a stint at Twitter, she joins us today, having started a brand new role, which I'll let her tell you all about. Super, super exciting. Welcome to Bold Thinking.
Julia and team, a pleasure to be here. I am 6 weeks in or so into this new gig that I have at Netflix, where I am directing consumer insights, or a team of consumer insights professionals across many aspects of their business. But I'm also coming to you today as the proud host of a podcast that I started over the summer called Culture Unfit. That's really catered or geared towards celebrating the misfits, the beautiful misfits at work and in life. And I'm very, very much looking forward to this conversation with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. Love all that. So where do we start? So Netflix, podcast, honestly, I'm so excited. So tell us a little bit about your career and, what got you into consumer research?
Well, I love questions like this because it's a chance for me to talk about how little I had, how little clarity I had around what I wanted to do. And in fact, I still don't know exactly what I want to do. So my journey into the field of consumer insights and research is one that is, I think, full of opportunistic plays. That's the best way I could put it, and scrappiness. What I'd say is that at the heart of everything I've done ever since I was a little girl, teenager, young adult, is a desire to want to impact people, affect people in very positive ways. So though I didn't have a very crystal clear view of what I wanted to be and what I wanted to do, I think the way that I showed up among my friends, at school, in dance classes, college work, I think I was always very much this person who wanted to connect to other humans, and to see them in whatever capacity do well and thrive. So when I was in Trinidad and Tobago, which is where I grew up, I danced, I studied ballet. I also, did my A levels, and without really having the sense as to what I wanted to do in life, I knew that I wanted to dance. So when I left Trinidad to go to college, though I danced on the side, I danced in my college dance company, continued to pursue a degree in international business. So there were a couple of sort of themes. One, this love of people, wanting to impact people, I was still nurturing by doing dance on the side. And, from a school perspective, the international side of life was starting to appeal to me. I did not know that I would eventually work for an international company, but I wanted to find a way to use Spanish, and I wanted to find a way to travel. So I did my study abroad in Madrid, and then moved to New York, where I was finally free to pursue my dreams of being a dancer. And I danced for a little bit in a company. I taught dance with an arts and education ensemble. It's called Bronx Arts Ensemble. And not, again, knowing what I wanted to do, eventually made my way into business school because I had hurt my wrist while dancing and didn't have health insurance, which, for the listeners, is a real thing that happens in the US because not everybody is guaranteed health insurance. But yeah, the long and short of it is that I spent this wonderful career traversing various parts of the globe at Colgate-Palmolive, a multinational company that's been around for ages, 200 years, over 200 years. And they have a collection of brands in personal care and home care. So toothpaste, toothbrushes, soaps, etc. And that allowed me to literally dance around the world. And I didn't dance literally, but I think I brought an energy to spaces that I occupied, and a curiosity and that desire to want to move people that I had when I was dancing and on stage. I think I just, without really knowing and without intention, I think it's who I am, used a lot of that creative energy to bring to life stories about people and their experiences, their feelings about the mouth and health and hygiene. And you might think that these are mundane categories. We spend like 2 minutes in the morning, mindlessly brushing our teeth and not thinking too seriously about what's in the toothpaste or what's in the toothbrush, but what it symbolizes to you, and how it makes you feel, right? And what it makes you feel when you don't brush your teeth. All of these things I think are interesting things, and doing so across cultures was exceptionally fascinating. But then having to try and create a story in a way that would compel people who were so far removed from these realities in suits in New York, in Manhattan, to like want to care and to do things differently, I think became a little bit of my passion. I was like, great, you think this is boring? Wait and see. Let me like create this like cool presentation and bring this data and insights to life in a way that makes everybody say, okay, let's pay attention. And then at some point, fast forward 14 years or so, I wanted to be disrupted myself. I felt like I had moved around the world. I'd lived in Mexico, I lived in Switzerland. And even though there needed to be some disruption as digital became the norm 10 years ago, there was a lot of resistance to thinking differently about how to market, as an example. And my choice to move into tech wasn't necessarily a choice against Colgate or consumer packaged goods. It was a choice for me. It was me sort of choosing myself and wanting to be in a space where I, looking back, years ahead from where I am right now, could say proudly, I was courageous. I tried something new. And I think that begun my search and led me to Twitter. And that was a wonderful experience. And I'm eternally grateful for it, because it exposed me to so much. I learned a lot more about myself and how to lead, and perhaps even more importantly, how people perceive me. And I walked away from Twitter moving into this Netflix role with an appetite for experimentation, but perhaps even more profoundly an understanding of my own goodness and strengths in the world. So yeah, I mean, that's the story. And I think I'm still, bringing a lot of that creative energy and curiosity. And it happens to be at Netflix, which is this world of entertainment. So I'm feeling both welcomed, because I consider myself like maybe an entertainer at heart, but also as a leader who has now had this experience living in different countries and experiencing different cultures, and transforming that love of people into this leadership role where I get to let others shine. I'm having a great time. But it's early days.
Wow. I mean, it's quite strong stuff. You cannot control the world around you, but you can only control yourself. I mean, it's something that really resonates with myself massively. And how would you describe your role at Netflix? You spoke about the digital element. I mean, what does that actually mean? Does that mean researching customers, understanding what people trends? What's your day-to-day thing? What do you gives that wakes you up in the morning, gives you that energy around that role?
Yeah, I mean, it's a multi-dimensional role, in that there are different elements or parts of the business that require partnership with a team that is adept at applying research techniques to answer fundamental questions about members and people who create movies. And so my role sits at the intersection of product, so the experience with the UI, or user interface, as it's known. So this is what you see when you open up Netflix, the app on TV or your laptop or your mobile phone. There's also the content, so the actual assets that make up the UI. So this includes the movies, but it also includes those little cards that allow you to understand really quickly what a movie is about. And so that aspect of the content experience sort of, there's a team working on those promotional assets. And then there's also the brand Netflix and the reputation that the company has within the entertainment industry across the globe. And I also have a team of people who are what we call social researchers, social insights researchers. So these are people who are adept at social listening. So combing the internet for conversations about a particular title, or it could be a particular theme. And they are specialists in this regard, because it requires a really, technical set of skills to be able to do that work. And so the conversations that I'm a part of really kind of span everything from, what is the future of entertainment? What should we be thinking about? Not in terms of like movies, but just in terms of the way that people have now turned to various apps to find entertainment, like TikTok. So, what's up with that, and what can we learn from them? All the way through to questions around like the assets that you see. So, and this is common knowledge, what your Netflix queue looks like and what my Netflix, queue looks like, completely different. But even if we're looking at the same series, what box art you might see on your screen is different from what I might see, right? So, there's a lot of behind the scenes that's happening to learn about our behavior. And my team complements that understanding of the behavior. So the data that just sort of like comes in code with an understanding of why. So like, why are you gravitating to certain things? Why am I gravitating to certain things? And what can we learn from that? And what innovation might that inspire? So yeah, again, a team of multidisciplinary researchers from all walks of life, all around the world, partnering with these teams focused on those different issues I just mentioned.
So does that work both ways, where people drive the content as well as the content gets given to the people? Do you see what I mean? So that, if there's like 1 million or 20 million people really interested in, I don't know, relationships with teenage daughters or something like that and how they manage them, would that then produce a show around it? Or is it much more you showing them, a collection of things that you want and hoping that they like it? How does that work? I've always wondered that. That's like a random question for a second.
Yeah, no, it's probably more the latter. Yeah. It's like a lot of these entertainment-based services, there's sort of, a certain portfolio that's already there. And, over time and through your behavior, your choices, how long you're spending looking at one, whether you start something and then you quickly abandon it, all of these things are inputs into an algorithm or machine learning, really, that then makes different choices for you, if that makes sense. Yeah. But I think, I'm not in charge of these decisions around the content, but I certainly think what the company's trying to do is to be extremely diverse in offering a variety of content so that people can navigate their own entertainment spaces in a unique way. So some people love true crime. Other people, are really into historical documentaries. And so I think the idea is provide a lot of wonderful content, allow creators from around the globe to have a chance to bring their own stories to life. And then it's up to you to discover what makes you happy. Yeah. But I think, the art of discovery requires learning about people. So how can we make it even easier for you to find the thing that brings you joy? Because there are thousands of things that you could find. So I think the art of discovery is a place where, the research team can be even more helpful.
That's brilliant. It's really, really good. So I really want to ask you a bit about our podcast. So what does bold thinking mean to you?
Oh, good. Yeah, first of all, kudos on the name. The name is amazing. I think that bold thinking, when I hear the term, I'm reminded of my own story, and it is courage to think outside of the box. And sometimes you don't know that you're in a box, and it does require courage and self-awareness. But if you have the self-awareness to know that perhaps there's something about the way that you exist in the world. I have become very aware of my own desire to want things to be better. And I think we're all a product of our childhood, good and bad, how we were raised. And I think while my mom wasn't like an activist, I certainly feel like her being a social worker, me being somebody who lived in a country of gorgeous women and, brilliant people, I never felt like I was the best. And so that affected the way that I saw myself in the world and saw others. And so my self-awareness, or my awareness of self has made it clear to me that the reason why, you know, I'll be the person who, if somebody like litters, I'll go up to them and say, "Oh, excuse me." I could let it go, right? I could totally let it go. But I think I'm bold and courageous in wanting to do that because I'm aware that for me, these little things matter. And you know, I could go deeper and psychoanalyze myself, but that has just sort of carried through in the office. So if somebody is being aggressed or being treated poorly, part of what I want to do that's sort of bold, that I don't see myself as a bold person, but I think I'm reacting to the question is I will likely be the person who will say, "Oh, I saw that. Like, are you okay? Let's sort of talk through it." But I might also be the person who would encourage the person who is hurt to find a way to have that conversation with the person who may have inadvertently hurt them with their words or their feedback. And I think that I've become more comfortable with that role as more people have said that's inspiring, right? Like, how do you do it? And I think the first time that happened was when I was in Switzerland still. I oversaw a team that sat in South Africa, Johannesburg, South Africa. And there was one Black woman who, after the call, was like, "Oh my God, Nikkia, like, how did you do it?" Right? Because I had like a German man on my right, a French man on my left, and, you know, a few other people, perhaps all men, all white men. And, you know, again, I think I move through the world as like this sort of curious dancer, even though I'm not anymore, and don't always see what people see in me. So I think I was challenging something in a very, you know, Nikkia way, which is sort of with a smile and like an empathy. But for her, looking through this lens, the telepresence screen in South Africa, it felt like very bold. She was like, "Oh my goodness, like, how do you even like go about doing that?" And that sort of sharpened my awareness of self, because I think I had this feeling inside of myself, which is just, I'm existing, I'm a hard worker. And what started to happen over the last 4 years, I'd say, is people would come to me, often those in marginalized groups, and say, "How are you doing it?" And so maybe the last thing I'd say is that bold thinking was just being able to sort of own it and say, maybe I can have my own podcast, which speaks squarely to these people who feel, one, inspired by somebody like me, which took a lot of work for me to even say the word. Like, why would anybody be inspired by me? Again, this is self-deprecating, Nikkia. But also to sort of say, oh, nobody else is necessarily talking to them specifically. Like, you feel othered in life, and then you come into a place of work, continue to feel othered, but have nowhere to go, nowhere to place it. You know, you hold on to the hurt, and it's really hard, particularly when you're young, to know where to go. Like, who do I trust in the office to just be like, am I crazy? Did that happen? So maybe that was like my last act of sort of bold thinking, to think that like I have something to say and something to share that others would be happy to hear and appreciate.
No, I think that's really inspiring. You know, I always have this saying in my mind that, you know, shine as brightly as you can for as long as you can, because you only live this life once. And, you know, shining for some people are very different than others, you know. Like you, my parents were in the Salvation Army, so did a lot of good in charitable organisations. And I do think it's in your nature and your DNA. It's something that almost like bubbles beneath, and you just has to explode and come out. And, you know, one of the things I've learned from working with a lot of very confident and amazing women over the years is actually underneath that sometimes there's a little bit of disbelief in how amazing they are. And actually, you know, it's just sometimes just letting that shine is just an influence and an energy for other people and other women to step forward, or in any organisation. So taking that dancing energy into big, you know, into pretty big corporate culture there is in itself is, you know, is really inspiring and really bold. And doing it in a way which is humble and lovely, and, you know, is another way, isn't it? It doesn't have to be the I'm, you know, standing for something. It's more, you know, a beautiful way of expressing something, which is like a form of dance. So I love that.
I do think I have an awareness, but it wasn't super conscious when I was like younger at work, that I stood out, and I did not necessarily know that I was using it, or it was working to my advantage. I think deep down in my subconscious, I may have been overcompensating for feeling like a misfit by being even more approachable. Like, who knows, right? In a parallel universe, if I wasn't like a corporate woman, I may still have this personality. I may still have this energy. And in fact, I think I would have, given how people talked about me in college, right? I was like sunshine girl, right? I'm like energy bunny. However, I think that at work, I have recognizing, perhaps not acutely at first, that I'm a Caribbean woman. I dance, I carry myself in a certain way. I have a lilt in my accent, right? Like I never, I mean, I lost some of my Trinidadian accent, but for the most part, I tried to retain it. Perhaps gave me entry into spaces that I might not have if I didn't have all of those other things. Figuring out at some point, and this goes back to this the self-awareness, that these were qualities that were additive in a room where it didn't exist, and figuring out how to sort of use it has been a wonderful journey. So, for example, when there's a contentious discussion and everybody's around the table with an opinion, what I might do is raise my hand with a smile and say, hey, everybody, I'm hearing, there's clearly a lot of passion at the table. What I'm hearing is, and so I think I'm able to leverage my questioning ability, which may come from being somebody who's worked in research, like what I'm hearing is, but also do so with a kind of energy that calms everyone, even though I would not describe myself as like the calming force, but I'm able to sort of like cut through. And I don't know, this is human nature. It's almost like when you are the difference in a room of sameness, there's not necessarily permission to then say something different, but there is likely some kind of energy disruption that could be positive or negative that one must be aware of and then use. So I'm aware that in those spaces, when I do unmute myself or when I do raise my hand, when we used to be all in meetings together physically, there's a thing that happens when people look at me, and having that awareness recently, and I'm always very, very clear with everybody. Like I'm like what do you call it? A late bloomer. Like my understanding of myself and what I'm good at and has come late in life. I think other people who've mentored me, even my husband, he's like, oh, it took you a long time to realize that, you're not ugly, you're whatever, right? And I was like, yeah, like it happened for a reason. But I now realize that there's a way to use that distinctiveness in these rooms, not just to my advantage, but to the collective advantage. And it's a really fun thing. I shouldn't say that, like, it took me a while to realize I'm not ugly. I think I just, again, I grew up in if you go to Trinidad, there are like a lot of gorgeous women. That's a whole other podcast about how I felt about myself as a young child.
Talking about bold ideas, what do you think your boldest idea has been so far, and how did you make it happen?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that my boldest idea, I mean, I've had a few leaps that I think were bold. The podcast, honestly, even though for some people it's like, oh, it's just a podcast, it was bold for me because I did not realize that I had a voice outside of work. Let me put it that way. So much of my energy has been placed inside of corporate environments, helping the teams that I lead and the individuals who report into me grow and become better. And teams that I operate in, cross-functionally leadership conversations that I'm in, I've used all of the skills that I just talked about, my ability to ask questions in a safe way, to cultivate a sort of like energy towards the goal. All these things have been placed within my 9 to 5, so to speak, my job. And so when I wasn't working, right, when I left Twitter earlier this summer, so this was June 2021, I was like, well, what is it that I can offer, right? Because so much of my identity had been intermingled with my work and my job title. And so simply saying, well, what is it that I enjoy doing? Oh my goodness, so much of my joy comes from looking at the young Nikkias, and not people who are like me, but just people who were coming from another country. So immigrants, for example, who are incredibly talented, but don't have the network built in that you have if you just grow up in a country that you kind of take for granted. You're like, oh, my dad knows this person. When you come from another country to pursue education, you just have to work harder. You need to do a little bit more. And so I asked myself the question, well, what is it that I do that I love? And figuring out the intersection of those two things, what you do well, your strengths, and where you have passion is major. Because you could have things that you're good at doing that you actually abhor, like you don't like. And then you could have things that you like doing, but you're actually not good at. So finding the intersection of that, I am great at this, these are strengths, and I also enjoy this, was like a whole exercise for me. And I'd encourage anybody listening to do that, like ask yourself those questions. And for me, it was clearly mentoring. It was those one-to-one conversations where I was able to listen to someone talk about an experience or a challenge they were facing, and really ask them questions to get them to the point of revelation, not telling them what to do, but just asking them questions. Because I think it's like therapy. Often the answers are within. We just need to talk it out. And so figuring out how I could do that, but without the support of a company, without the built-in employee base of a corporation, and realizing that, wait, I have a voice and there are many people who still write to me. What if I let them give me their stories of feeling like a misfit, getting feedback about something that they're doing that is natural to them? You're too loud, and you're just like, but that's who I am. Felt very brave for me. And you know that it's right when you put it out there and people are like, this is great. Like, this story resonated with me. So it felt like a bold move. And perhaps the boldest move is simply keeping it going. Because what has happened with me in my life is work has consumed me, and not in a toxic, like I'm a workaholic way, but I give so much beyond the actual project work and the work of business. I will have my calendar filled with one-on-ones with people because I love mentoring and coaching. And so when I started working at Netflix, I sort of made this commitment, a promise to myself, and I had to be brave, courageous, self-aware, bold. And that was that I would maintain these healthy boundaries. I would literally have a laptop that was personal and a laptop that was work related, and the two would not meet. They will not stare at each other. They will sit on my desk on opposite ends, and I would dedicate time to the mentorship, the podcast, the speaking, and I would also give back to work, but I would not let the work consume me to the point where all of a sudden I had to stop doing the podcast and the mentoring. So I think that's been bold and brave of me. I am scared, but I've tried to make this a safe journey for me by letting friends and close colleagues in, so that they can hold me accountable. And that's, scary to be like, I need help. I know myself. I'm going to slip.
But you know what, as well? I mean, about 7 years ago, I started being an ambassador for a breast cancer charity. And, I just thought, who sits in these charity meetings, and how did all this work? Millions of fundraising. And I've had breast cancer twice. It was something that really affected me and I wanted to be part of. And I walked into this room one day, a gala board, and they were trying to raise £1 million to support research and the charity. And there was the CMO of Sky, there was a head of Omnicom, there was like all these amazing people. And do you know what? I thought, I feel ashamed of myself. I've never, ever done this. I've been busy running a company, busy building a business. And the 7 years I've been involved, which is not my job. It's not part of my job. I don't get paid for doing it. I do it because I love doing it, has made me so much better at my job. I have to say, it's rewarded me more than anything I could ever imagine. And everything that I do, and I've learned from it, has gone into my job like a ball of dynamite. So I would say, you know, back to you, they have so complemented each other, and I've got better at my job because of it. But I think it's almost like they are you. And then actually together, they just fuel you into one powerful you. If not, you just become a bit, I thought I was becoming a bit narrow, you know, and this whole world opened up ahead of me with these amazing people I would never have met. And I'm so grateful. So sorry, back at you.
I love it. No, I love it. I think that
don't feel guilty. I think you're doing an amazing thing.
Yeah, I feel it in my heart. And I know this is the thing about life. When you're going through a thing, and thank you for sharing your story, you don't really know what's on the other side. And, you know, when people are like, look, it'll eventually get there. I use this visual. I'm a very visual person. Oftentimes when we're in it, I feel like I'm in a tunnel in a car that's stuck in traffic, but I'm 3/4 the way through, so I can see the light, but it's not a clear road. There's like traffic, and I can almost see what would have to happen, how I'd have to maneuver to just be free of it, but I'm stuck. But it's not a stuck feeling, because you're like, you know, you know that there will be movement. And so this is something that I think comes with age and maturity too, just sort of like the knowing and the sitting with this feeling of sweet discomfort. And it's sweet because like a lot of passages in life that feel bumpy, you're kind of like, okay, like I'm hoping like things work out and I'm on the other side, but you still have to kind of sit with it. You can't move through the phase of not knowing. You can't move through this phase like I'm at right now, where I'm still learning, and I want to be able to be more knowledgeable than I am, but it takes time. So I love hearing your story and other people's stories, because I know that, and I already feel it, things are going to continue to feel good, and I'm going to continue to feel empowered through these multiple things that are happening for a reason, and the reason is unfolding with every breath. And it's almost like, that's what I always say, this Steve Jobs, it's only when I look back I could connect the dots. And sometimes you think, and it's back to my next question, I really want to ask of you, what do you think people need from brands today, and what's going to help them to thrive in the future? What's your thoughts around, you know, what makes a brand thrive in the future? What do people want from brands today? I think that this is a really fascinating question in this day and age, because, you know, 10 years ago, even, we didn't have the intensity of competition in spaces like we do now. And so when I think about the relationship that people have with brands and the responsibility that brands have, I think one word kind of jumps out for me, and that is humanity. Brands aren't humans, but I think the expectation that people have is that brands respect the fact that they serve humanity, right? Like they exist not in this vacuum. Yes, you know, when you're sitting inside of the building that is the brand, it's about profits and all of that stuff. But there is a responsibility to recognize that the profits come from actual people, like real human beings. And the more that the people who are the upholders of brand recognize that that's where the true value is, and seeing your proposition as something that serves humanity, I think a lot of things start to get unlocked and profit follows. But if a brand's responsibility is like simply about making money, and you lose sight of the people behind it, then there may be some short-lived bumps and gains. However, the long-term success of that company, that brand, is something that I think is more suspect. Again, in this day and age where there's transparency, not necessarily two ways, but I think there's a lot more information that we as people have. And so we're poking holes, right? We're asking questions like, what's your carbon footprint? Like, you know, what are you doing to give back? And so the responsibility, I think, for brands and the opportunity is to recognize the humanity in the business, and put people over profits as much as they can. No, I'm totally with you that. And, you know, we had a good one from the Design Council recently. It's a whole sort of, you know, planet, people, profit, you know, and how then we sort of feed back into that, which I just think is so
So I feel like I'm speaking to a kindred soul. Honestly, I mean, I'm captivated here. I'm just going to ask you one more thing before we end this podcast. I absolutely love talking to you. Is how optimistic are you about the future?
Oof. I'm going to dimensionalize that question into two parts. The first is when I think about future for me and my closest circle. So this is like my family. And then when I go one circle or one layer out to the sort of world at large, the planet. And so I'll start with the latter first. I'm sadly not as optimistic as I'd like to be about the future when it comes to what's going on in the world. I mean, I think I've been watching Our Planet on Netflix with my kids. And while, it's David Attenborough, and then, you're captivated, the scenes are beautiful. Like there's a lot of death and destruction that feels like we're just hopelessly steamrolling down. And I don't want to leave you with that. That's why I'm going with that first. But, there's a lot that we're losing, whether that's, from deforestation or whatever, that feels scary and out of control, right? Like it's a terrifying thing. When I think about myself and my family, and maybe even more my immediate community, I have much more optimism. And that comes from a place of my own energy to leave it better than I found it. What I am trying to do as a mother of two young kids, to instill in them a personal responsibility to treat people with respect. I mean, I'm big on social, emotional development in early childhood, because I see that at the end of the day, while we may not be able to control, no matter how much we try, and we're going to all do our part to try and help this planet, but we may not be able to control it as much as we would like for the next two generations. What they can control is this little orbit that they have, and whether it's their classmates or their community, knowing that their responsibility is to bring joy, right? To not be someone that is not nice to play with. It starts with that tiny little nugget. Like, are you somebody who other kids want to play with? Are you the person who, when you see somebody sitting in the playground by herself, by himself, by their self, feels compelled to go say, hey, is everything okay? And so if I could do one good thing to create a sense of optimism for myself and my family, it is instilling this love of people, this desire to want to, don't assume that like that person is like fine. Go ahead and say like, are you okay? Are you cold? Like what's going on? It has a butterfly effect. And I am very much optimistic that the goodness that I'm trying to instill in my kids, my community, is having a butterfly effect, and maybe even counteracting what I just talked about around the planet. But I am hopeful, I'm excited, and I'm continually inspired by my own ability to attract this goodness that I want to put out in the world, that I want to see in the world. So the more that we do this, to your point, Julia, the more that it's going to come back to us. And that leaves me really optimistic.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. That's absolutely brilliant. What's the name of your podcast? I'm going to do a shout out for that as well.
So my podcast is Culture Unfit. So at Culture Unfit, Instagram, but really anywhere you can listen to podcasts. But also, I'd be happy to talk to anybody who would be interested in, learning more about my story. And you can find me at Nikkia Star, NIKKASTAR, anywhere that you can find social media except for TikTok.
Well, thank you for joining us today. I literally could talk to you for the next 5 hours. And thank you to everyone for listening to Bold Thinking, Entrepreneurial Stories Honestly Told. If this episode got you thinking, contact us on LinkedIn, Twitter or Instagram. So join us next time to hear from anybody else who's making a positive change in the world. Absolutely brilliant. Love talking to you. Thank you. Really good.
Thank you so much. Thank you.